James Carter stood in his pristine kitchen, meticulously measuring coffee grounds into his French press. It was exactly 6:15 a.m., just as it had been every morning for the past 15 years. He glanced at his reflection in the polished steel of his refrigerator, adjusting his already perfect Windsor knot. Another day, another chance for excellence, he murmured to himself. As the owner and head chef of Precision, the most sought-after restaurant in the city, James had built his life and career on an unwavering commitment to perfection. His dishes were works of art, each element placed with surgical accuracy. His kitchen ran like a well-oiled machine, every staff member moving in a carefully choreographed dance of culinary excellence. But lately, a creeping sense of dissatisfaction had begun to gnaw at him. Despite the accolades and the constant stream of reservations, something felt off. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. His wife, Erica, entered the kitchen, her hair tousled from sleep. "Morning, James," she yawned, reaching for a mug. "Any chance you could make me one of your perfect lattes?" James winced at the way she emphasized perfect. "Of course," he replied, already reaching for the precisely warmed milk. As he handed her the latte, decorated with an immaculate rosetta, Erica sighed. "You know, sometimes I miss the days when you just slosh some milk in a mug and call it good." James frowned. Why would you want something subpar when you could have the best? Erica just shook her head and wandered back upstairs, leaving James to ponder her words as he prepared for work. At Precision, James moved through his usual routine with practiced ease. He inspected each incoming ingredient, sent back a shipment of slightly blemished tomatoes, and critiqued his sous chef's knife skills. "Marco, those julienne carrots are uneven," James said, his voice sharp. "Do them again." Marco, a talented young chef who had been with Precision for 6 months, bit back a retort and started over. As lunch service began, James felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. This was where he shined, where his pursuit of perfection paid off. Each dish that left the kitchen was a masterpiece, a testament to his skill and dedication. But as he placed the final garnish on a plate of seared scallops, his hand trembled slightly. The microgreen leaf fell just a fraction off-center. James stared at the plate, horror creeping through him. He reached to adjust it, but the expediter had already whisked it away to the dining room. For the rest of service, James couldn't shake his unease. That one imperfect dish felt like a personal failure, a crack in his carefully constructed world. As the last customer left, James retreated to his office, poring over the day's feedback. His eyes caught on one comment card. Food was technically flawless, but lacked soul. It felt more like science than cuisine. The words hit James like a physical blow. He crumpled the card, tossing it into the trash. On his drive home, James couldn't stop thinking about the comment. Had his pursuit of perfection come at the cost of passion? He was so lost in thought that he almost missed his turn, having to swerve at the last second. The unexpected movement sent a jolt through him, a tiny thrill he hadn't felt in years. At home, he found Erica in the kitchen, surrounded by a mess of flour and dough. "What's all this?" he asked, eyeing a lopsided pie cooling on the counter. Erica grinned, flour smudged on her cheek. "I'm baking for the school fundraiser. Want to help?" James hesitated. Baking was precise, scientific. He could do that, but the chaos in the kitchen made him uneasy. "Come on," Erica urged. "I promise I won't make you measure anything." Something in her playful tone made James relent. He rolled up his sleeves and joined her at the counter. For the next hour, James found himself laughing more than he had in months. They made a mess, spilled ingredients, and produced a batch of cookies that were far from uniform. But as he bit into one, still warm from the oven, James was struck by how good it tasted. "See?" Erica said, noticing his expression. "Perfection is overrated." The next day at Precision, James couldn't shake the memory of those imperfect, delicious cookies. As he began prep for dinner service, he made a spontaneous decision. "Marco," he called to his sous chef, "I want you to create a special for tonight. Anything you want. Don't show me until it's ready to serve." Marco looked stunned but nodded eagerly. Throughout service, James found himself distracted, wondering what Marco was creating. When the dish finally appeared, James was taken aback. It was a deconstructed lasagna, with handmade pasta sheets draped haphazardly over a rich ragu. The plating was far from precise, with sauce splattered artfully around the plate. It looked nothing like anything Precision had ever served. "It's inspired by my Nana's recipe," Marco explained nervously. "I called it chaos in the kitchen." James stared at the dish, his instincts warring within him. Part of him wanted to reject it outright for its messiness. But another part, a part that had been awakened by those homemade cookies, was intrigued. He took a bite. Flavors exploded across his palate. The pasta was perfectly al dente, the sauce rich and complex. But more than that, the dish had a warmth to it, a soul that James realized had been missing from his own creations. "It's wonderful," James admitted, surprising himself as much as Marco. That night, chaos in the kitchen was the talk of the restaurant. Customers raved about its rustic charm and bold flavors. James watched from the kitchen, a mix of emotions swirling within him. As he drove home, James found himself taking a different route, one that led him past a small, hole-in-the-wall pizzeria. On impulse, he pulled over and went inside. The place was cramped and noisy, nothing like the refined atmosphere of Precision. But the smell of baking dough and melting cheese was intoxicating. James ordered a slice and watched in fascination as the cook tossed dough into the air with practiced ease, not a measuring cup in sight. When the pizza arrived, it was a far cry from the carefully plated dishes James was used to. The crust was slightly charred in spots, the toppings unevenly distributed. But as he took a bite, James felt something shift inside him. The pizza was delicious, full of flavor and texture. More than that, it was joyful. He could taste the passion that had gone into its creation. For the first time in years, James felt truly inspired. Over the next few weeks, James began to experiment. He loosened the reins in his kitchen, encouraging his staff to take risks and infuse their personalities into their cooking. He introduced a new menu section called Imperfect Perfections, featuring dishes that prioritized flavor and creativity over precise presentation. At home, he and Erica started cooking together more often, embracing the mess and unpredictability. Their laughter filled the kitchen that had once been a temple to precision. One evening, as they sat down to a slightly lopsided homemade lasagna, Erica reached across the table and squeezed James' hand. "I've missed this side of you," she said softly. James smiled, realizing he had missed it too. His pursuit of perfection had nearly cost him the joy of his craft and the warmth of his relationships. But by embracing imperfection, he had found something far more valuable: authenticity, creativity, and a renewed passion for life. As he took another bite of the imperfectly perfect lasagna, James felt more content than he had in years. He had finally learned that true perfection lies not in flawless execution, but in the beauty of genuine, heartfelt creation. Months after his epiphany, James stood in the bustling kitchen of precision, but it was hardly recognizable as the sterile, regimented space it had once been. Laughter mingled with the sizzle of pans and the chopping of knives. Chefs called out to each other, sharing ideas and playfully critiquing dishes. James watched as Marco, now as head chef, put the finishing touches on a new creation. The plate was a riot of colors and textures, nothing like the precise arrangements precision had been known for. "What do you call this one?" James asked, genuinely curious. Marco grinned. "I'm calling it Beautiful Chaos. Want to try it?" James took a bite and closed his eyes, savoring the explosion of flavors. "It's wonderful, Marco. Absolutely wonderful." As he opened his eyes, James noticed a food critic entering the kitchen. It was Susan Chun, known for her scathing reviews and exacting standards. "Mr. Carter," she said, approaching him, "I must say, I was skeptical when I heard about the changes at Precision, but after tonight's meal, I owe you an apology." James raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Susan nodded. "I've always prided myself on recognizing perfection in cuisine, but what you're doing here, it's beyond perfection. It's real. It's passionate. It's alive." She gestured around the kitchen. "You've created something truly special here. A place where creativity flourishes, where chefs are free to express themselves. The food, it has soul now." James felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you, Susan. That means a lot." As the critic left, Erica entered the kitchen, carrying a cake box. "Special delivery for the best chef in town," she announced with a wink. James opened the box to find a homemade cake, slightly lopsided and unevenly frosted. Written in wobbly letters were the words, "Perfectly imperfect." Laughing, James cut into the cake and began passing slices to his staff. As they all enjoyed the sweet treat, he cleared his throat. "You know, not too long ago, I would have been embarrassed to serve something like this. I was so caught up in the idea of perfection that I forgot why I fell in love with cooking in the first place." He looked around at his team, his eyes bright. "But now I understand. Perfection isn't about flawless presentation or technical precision. It's about passion, creativity, and joy. It's about creating food that makes people happy, that tells a story, that brings people together." James raised his piece of cake. "So here's to imperfection, to messy kitchens and experimental flavors, to the beauty of trying and sometimes failing, to food that's made with love, even if it's not Instagram perfect." The kitchen erupted in cheers and applause. As James looked around at the smiling faces of his staff, at Erica beaming with pride, he felt a sense of fulfillment that no amount of Michelin stars could ever provide. Later that night, as James and Erica walked home hand in hand, he turned to her. "You know, I think I've finally figured out the secret ingredient I've been missing all these years." "Oh?" Erica asked. "And what's that?" James smiled. "Life. Real, messy, imperfect, beautiful life." As they continued their walk, James felt grateful for the journey that had brought him here. He had learned that true fulfillment comes not from chasing an impossible ideal, but from embracing the beautiful imperfections of life and finding joy in the journey itself. And in that realization, James had discovered a perfection far greater than anything he could have ever imagined.